Hi, I'm Elaine LaChapelle, Head of Membership and Leadership Development here at the Ontario Real Estate Association. And today I'm speaking with Leonard Brody. Leonard is a business and technology visionary. He's a co-founder and chair of Caravan, a joint venture with Creative Arts Industry. Leonard is an award-winning entrepreneur. He's a venture capitalist, a best-selling author, and a two-time Emmy-nominated media visionary. And we are delighted to have him with us today to share just a few highlights of what he spoke about recently at our Peak Leadership Summit. Hi, Leonard, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Great, thanks for joining us. Now, in your presentation, you spoke about quite a few changes that you anticipate are going to happen, some of them as a result of the pandemic. I wondered if you could start by talking about some of the changes you expect to see with respect to where people live and work.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this is still going to be played out because as we sort of bounce back out of the pandemic and we move a little bit into a slight bit of normalcy, although events of the last 48 hours don't help that normalcy. But I would say work in particular, I think is forever changed. So I say this a lot that and I don't think this is rocket science or by any stretch, but when you have these kind of historical reset moments, they shine a spotlight on the DNA of things where you start to see like, oh, maybe the reason we did this isn't that relevant anymore. And it forces a behavioral shift, which is actually easier or better, or you like better that you probably wouldn't have done before just because of habit and behavior. And I think what has come out of this around work is it's very clear that working from home for many people is going to be the norm. And if you look at the hundreds of surveys that get published around people talking to their employees, none of them come back and say, I want to be at the office full time. I don't think there's one actually. So I think you'll see a blend. And I think the realization is that the blend is going to be divided between the things you need to do in person. So face-to-face meetings, group work, brainstorming, product, things that really are best done in person. That's really where the office will come to play. And I think most of the sort of solitary work will be done at home. And I think people are going to want that blend, whether it's 3 days at home and 2 days in the office. But, the office was built around the DNA of a factory of paper. If you go back to the first office in modern history, which was East India House on Leadenhall Street. And I think what you'll see now is the DNA changes. The office is someplace you meet and gather, and home is where you work. And you'll see floor plates change because of that, and much more design around open space and design around human interaction. So I think that's the shift. I think in terms of the way people live, ironically, I'm not sure that the only thing COVID did in my view was it caused a reasonably large temporary resettlement for some people, where they had a chance to go work in the mountains or go work in Hawaii or do something they wanted to do. So I think it opened up the sort of collective awareness that that's a possibility and that can be done in this day and age. I'm not so sure that it changes the permanent resettlement, but I do think that you're going to see a large sort of swelling in the 1 hour bedroom communities from major metropolitan areas. I think that will grow. So I think communities, if you looked at Ontario, the Kingstons of the world and Cobourg and Peterborough and areas like that where people can get much more value for their dollars, is going to be quite realistic actually now. And I think you'll see a bit of the swelling and the growth of major metro areas into those 1 hour urban communities. And I don't think that'll change. The only thing I would say is as we move over the next 5 to 10 years into autonomous vehicles, that's probably going to have a bigger shift in terms of reurbanization and resettlement than anything else will.
And why so? Why do you say that? And then it will make commutes easier, more livable?
Yeah, I think again, the plausible outcome that I see is when you think about a commute today, the commute is relatively uncomfortable. So you're either driving and you're in a car, and so you might be able to do calls, but it's not super efficient. Or if you're sitting in an Uber, or even if you're lucky enough to have a driver come and pick you up, you're still sitting in the back of a car. I think what you'll see in the commercial real estate world is when you have an office building, that office building as part of its amenities, or even a company as part of its amenities, will have a fleet of urban autonomous vehicle offices. So basically what will come to your door won't look like a car that you see today. It'll look more like a bit of a cube van that picks you up. And in that is a fully functional office. So it's a desk and Wi-Fi and a phone. And so your commute really doesn't take away from your work, and you can actually be functional. You can be sitting and doing Zoom calls and doing emails, so that it's real actual work time. And I think that will really change the way we think about people's settlement in cities, because even if you're an hour and a half away, you can get a full hour and a half work done on the way in, same on the way back. So it doesn't work for people who get car sickness, but beyond that, it's a pretty good model.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know, you talked about people living more outside for more affordability, and in Ontario, that's just booming at this point. The cost of a home is unachievable for many people. So you also talked about changes you anticipate related to home ownership and a new asset class, as you talked about. Can you elaborate on what you shared?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think the crippling problem for most human beings on this planet is we only have experience with the 80 to 85 years that we're alive here. And so what we think of as historically normal is often quite historically abnormal, and home ownership is incredibly historically abnormal. So if you went back to the turn of the 20th century, most people didn't own their homes. The vast majority of people did not, because it was incredibly expensive. And and often if you owned that home, you probably built it with your own hands, more likely than not. So I think what has happened is you've moved into the situation where we think of home ownership as something normal, or almost even a right, the way you hear people speak about it today. But the reality is home ownership exists today because of financial engineering. Actually, that's not totally true. Financial engineering and policy. So basically, you had policies where people were driving home ownership as a desirable outcome for North Americans. It was forced savings so you didn't become a ward of the state. It was good for the urban resettlement of cities. It was better for the banks because they could actually have a product they could secure against. And so mortgages were used as a way to make it affordable. And mortgages traditionally weren't a consumer product. They were a fleet or B2B product that got brought down to consumers. And the problem is the costing and the underlying economics have now made mortgages not as valuable as they were before, because the land cost and the building cost have just risen exponentially. So the flaw in all of that is we've been trained to think that we need to own 100% of our home. And the truth is you don't. What you need is ownership, enjoyment, and control. And so what I think you'll start to see happen over the next few years is people will use the blockchain as a way, because it's such an efficient way to keep contractual license and ownership over something. People will use the blockchain to create an aftermarket in securities and homes. So the easiest example is a condo developer. So if a condo developer is putting a building up in downtown Toronto, they can then create a coin, which is a financial instrument that owns 40% of every unit in that building. Or it could be done individual units, but probably more efficient to be the whole fleet. And that coin is now a liquid trading asset that you can move the same way you would move a security or a stock. It's almost the exact same model. And the owner then can come in and buy 60% of the condo, full control. They're the ones who decide when to sell it. They don't even know the 40% exists really, other than there's a real aftermarket in the valuation of the condos, which you wouldn't have had before. And by the same token, you have a ability to really drive the cost down in these units so that you're really only paying 60% of the market value.
Wow. It's fascinating thinking about that. Clearly it's possible, and something's going to happen, right? We know that for people to be able to afford to live somewhere. Yeah, I don't think there's any choice. I mean, the average person won't be able to afford a home, and so you have to solve it through financial engineering. And so even if I'm wrong, and by the way, I'm not saying this will be the only solution, there will be others, but historically we know that you solve affordability through financial engineering. Interesting. And I mean, those are pretty major changes, both of what you talked about, the whole work at home, the asset class that you're talking about. So can we talk, just to finish off by talking about the impact on realtors? So what is their role? How will they need to adapt in that kind of an environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think today real estate agents think of themselves as selling land. I think in the future, the way they're going to have to think about it is their worlds will become more complex because they'll be selling physical assets, but they'll also be selling securities. And so I think they're going to have to start thinking about, if you looked at a large real estate agency, they're going to have it could be an individual or it could be a division, where the division that focuses on the sale to the customer versus a securities division that focuses on selling the aftermarket securities in real estate. And I think that's going to be the big change for a lot of these folks to get their heads around is, how do you think about this one condo unit has two parts? It has the normal thing we sell, which is the use and enjoyment and the ownership and the title. And then it's got a security attached to it that owns the rest. So I think that's going to be really the big change. I think the good news, as financial markets and markets generally become more complex, human navigators become really important. And I think you've seen over the history of the real estate agencies that even as 360 tours and all these things that people said we're going to disintermediate the real estate agents, in fact, just ended up being great tools for the agents to use to sell product. I don't think there's been a mass reduction in the amount of people that use agents to find homes. So I think this is just good news. As markets get more complex, the human navigators that help you go through them become more valuable. And so I think that'll be the case here because let's use an example, right? Let's say you're about to buy that condo that just went up at Young and Bloor and you're buying your 60%, but you also want to know what the 40% looks like on the back end. Like, where's it trading and what's the pricing? And is the pricing of that 40% different than the 60% we're paying? And is there price parity? Because you could see very clearly that those two things could have very different values. The use and enjoyment could be valued much higher than the liquidity, or it could be the other way around. The liquidity could be valued higher than the use and enjoyment. So I think the good news is, I think as realtors get more adjusted to that split, they're going to be much more valuable in terms of navigating what is a pretty complex landscape coming forward, I think.
That is very true. And I think that being aware of some of these potential changes helps to prepare anybody for the changes in their business, especially for realtors. So it's always interesting to talk to you, Leonard. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Great. I've been speaking with Leonard Brody, business and technology visionary. And you can learn more about Leonard on Instagram at lbrody. Thanks so much.